listening to the Podcast Advertising Playbook, your resource to better understand and execute successful podcast ad campaigns. Hello and welcome to the Podcast Advertising Playbook. I'm your host, Heather Osgood. Today, I'm joined by Jonas Woost. He is the co-founder of Bumper. Jonas, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So tell me a little bit about Bumper. I know you guys have really a very rich history, and I would just like to know a little bit about where the company began and where you are currently.
So thanks for asking. Bumper, we call ourselves a podcast, data, and growth company. So there's a lot going on in there. At the end of the day, we help our clients figure out how can they grow their podcasts. That is our main job. People come to us. They often have shows already, and they come to us and they say, I think I should have a bigger audience. I should reach more people, different people. And they come to us for guidance, for advice, and we sort of execute marketing campaigns as well. The data piece is interesting for us because we, over the years, like so many other people, have figured out, when it comes to growing a podcast, there isn't really a one-size-fits-all plan. Like there's no blueprint that you can just apply to all podcasts. If there was, it would be so easy to grow a show, right? Hey, do these 10 things and you're going to be fine. Obviously, that doesn't exist. Otherwise, we would all have massive podcasts. Instead, everyone needs their own individual customized growth plan based on people's not just budget, but also competitive set and timing and talent and how much they want to put into goals, audience. You know, there's all these pieces. We need to figure out, based on all these pieces, what is the growth strategy that might make sense for any particular podcast. However, there's one shortcut. It's not perfect, but there's one shortcut that we found to a growth plan that is going to work, which is data. And frankly, it's not rocket science. It's all about understanding what's worked in the past and doing that again, or the inverse, learn from past failures and not keep making the same mistakes. So we spend a lot of time analyzing data for our clients' shows and really figure out what are some trends, what are some insights, what are some learnings from past performance that we can then apply to future growth campaigns. So this is where the data piece comes in. We're very informed. We like to say informed by data, not driven by data, to help our clients grow their shows.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things that's really fascinating to me, I've been in the industry now for a little over 10 years. And when I started in podcast advertising, it obviously was difficult, but at the time, I think there were around 400,000 podcasts that existed, right? And you and I both know that if there were 400,000 podcasts that existed, how many of those were actively publishing episodes? Probably maybe 50,000 would be my guess. And what has always been very funny to me is that I'll have had a host that, has a very established audience that, is a large audience. And then they'll say, well, I'm tired of talking about this true crime. I'm going to start an exercise podcast. And then they go and they start this whole new podcast and they're shocked by how difficult it is to grow an audience, in part because when they started their true crime podcast 10 years ago, the audience just kind of developed. And one of the things that I find really fascinating is how little data there actually really seems to be about your audience and about consumption. And, obviously there are a lot of reasons why that data doesn't exist, right? And it's because of the open source nature and the fact that we're not distributing this content on one specific platform like YouTube, where we can say, hey, you become a YouTube subscriber and now tell me everything about your entire life history, right? So the very nature of podcasts has really created this kind of, data desert in some ways. So I guess I'm curious, I know that you and your team have put a lot of energy behind this data piece. Tell us a little bit about where are you getting that data and how are you analyzing it?
So to your first point about folks starting new shows right now, and they might have a show from the past that grew very fast and now they're struggling. We see this all the time. Yeah. And the irony, of course, in your example that you bring, I have a big show already, a true crime podcast, and I want to do something else. Even moving that audience over from your existing show to your new show can be really, really hard. Fully agree with you. I think there's many different reasons. Yeah, the data, we call it the data desert. We spent all day, every day just thinking about that and working on this. The big gap that we're seeing and the big dangerous gap that we have in podcasting is for years, we have been looking at what we call podcast delivery data. And often that's downloads. That means delivery as in like a file was delivered to someone's phone. It obviously doesn't have to be a phone. It could be a desktop computer, but files are being transferred. Those file transfers being counted, they're called downloads. The gap between the delivery and the consumption. Well, there's a bunch of downloads, but do people really listen to those downloads? And there's a gap, and there's actually a pretty big gap there. We feel, and we have seen that when we try to make growth decisions or business decisions, any decisions based on data, just looking at downloads is just not enough because it doesn't tell you actually what's happening because, right, downloads happen all the time. They might happen automatically. People might download something, never listen to. So we like to look at consumption data. Here's the good news. And I think we overlook that too much. The good news is that this is in North American and parts of Europe are also impacted by this. Because most of the consumption, depending who you're going to ask, 75, 80, 85% of all consumption happens on 3 different platforms today. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, I don't know. Only happens on 3 different platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, of course. Those 3 platforms actually give us really good data around consumption. They're the places that actually know, well, did someone really hit play? How many people hit play? How long did they listen for? Did they pause and then stop? At what point did that drop off? All that information, as we know, is available. It's wonderful. Apple, Spotify, and YouTube as well, they give us that information. The problem is, that's 3 different places, right? I now have to log into 3 different ones. And of course, they all display the data slightly differently. And you can have to start squinting and see like, well, this went up here on that day. Did it also go, up at the same time on the other platform? So the aggregation of the data is a big problem. And then also the normalization. Because as you will know, a Spotify play is not the same as an Apple Podcast play, which is also not the same as a YouTube view. So you can't actually just add up those numbers, which one would be tempted to do this. So there's a problem about data aggregation and then normalization. Can we just make an apples to apples comparison? We spend a lot of time on that. And I think you know that we built the software that does that for us just to make it easier. It's not even easier, just to make it workable because
just makes it understandable, right? Because
of course. Yeah. And day to day, Heather, you work on so many shows, you don't have the time, and your team doesn't have time to log into so now I mentioned 3 different dashboards, right? Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Well, obviously downloads are also important. So we log into the hosting provider. But wait, what about Magellan? Do we want to look at Podscribe as well? So suddenly you're looking at 7 different dashboards for dozens of shows. Obviously, no one can do that. So we built this solution for that. It helps our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. So how is this data helping out specifically, right? So you've got this idea that we've been using a download in the industry for as long as I know, right? And I guess I always like to pause really quick. James Cridland wrote a really interesting article several years back now about like kind of understanding metrics in podcasting. And the download, I think, is just such a confusing word, period, right? Because most of the time you're not actually downloading the file onto your phone, but sometimes you are downloading it. And sometimes people do listen, sometimes people don't listen. So I guess unpack that first for us. Like if we need to look at downloads, right? Because that's the number that we have. And it's also an industry standard. So I think that that's important. But unpack for us kind of what is the difference between the download and the consumption. And as you mentioned, we can get consumption numbers on these 3 different platforms, and Bumper helps aggregate that information. But just break it down a little bit for us in terms of what is a download?
Yes. So a download is a file transfer that happens from typically a hosting provider to someone's device. That might or might not lead to listening. And you're absolutely correct that it's so confusing. And Spotify actually make this more confusing to us. On Apple is a little bit more straightforward because Apple Podcast, by default, under certain circumstances, will auto-download episodes of a podcast that you follow. Great, no problem at all. And it makes sense, sort of offline, right? The file goes onto your phone if you use Apple Podcast, and then if you start listening to an episode, the file's already there. No further data transfer needs to happen. Great. But actually, what happens when you are under certain circumstances, listen on Spotify, actually that also generates a download,
Hmm.
despite the fact like it doesn't feel like be downloaded, but the file is being transferred from the
Right.
hosting provider
Hmm.
to the Spotify, client on your phone or maybe on your computer, and that will also count as a download, despite the fact
Hmm.
that, well, it doesn't feel like I streamed it, didn't I? There's actually like this whole idea of streaming doesn't really exist up, but maybe soon will with the work that Apple is doing right now.
Yeah,
Um,
it's interesting,
so
huh?
like, absolutely. So downloads have been generated all over the place. Even if you
Hmm.
listen to a podcast in some sort of a web interface, like some sort of player that's maybe embedded into a website, that will also generate a download because the file is being transferred from the server into the player. So these downloads happen all the time. They also sometimes, frankly, happen for reasons we don't understand. I'm sure
Mm.
you've seen it before where you suddenly have this spike of downloads on a certain day or a certain month on a certain episode, and you're kind of like, I don't actually know what happened there. Lots of different reasons that can happen. We like to look at consumption. So what does that
Hmm.
mean? We like to think about, well, how many times did people actually hit play?
Hmm.
Like actually for real, like confirmed by someone, verified by Apple, by Spotify, by YouTube, by someone else. How many times did they actually hit play? And actually, if you want to go in a little bit nerdier, what we like to think about is, well, okay, how many times did someone hit play, but actually stuck around for a bit? And for us, often that's 60 seconds.
Okay, that's
Because
what I was going
that
to ask you what a
mm,
bit is.
a
So,
bit is
because the IB standard is 60 seconds, right?
the IAB sort of manages downloads here. They don't, in terms of consumption and
No,
playback,
for
there are
sure.
no,
They don't. But somebody has to download at least 60 seconds of the podcast in order
that's
for
right.
it to count as a download.
That is
But they don't
correct.
have to necessarily consume it. But
Mhm.
you're also using the consumption metric of 60 seconds.
60 seconds is
Okay.
what we typically use. And there's a very specific reason for that. Um, I hope that's okay, maybe for your audience. We're going to go quite deep here right now. And don't worry, we're going to pull out again. Is Spotify Stream. Spotify gives us a number that is how many times did someone hit play and then listen for 60 seconds. So that
Oh,
data is
okay.
available. So like to use
Okay.
the 60 seconds because that's what Spotify gives us.
Sure.
On YouTube is again different. A YouTube view, what is a YouTube view? YouTube view is actually something that is not documented. YouTube doesn't tell us what a view is.
I have heard this that they do
Hmm.
not tell you.
But it appears to be that a YouTube view is someone hitting play. So this is not autoplays. Someone hitting play on YouTube and then sticking around for approximately 30 seconds. Apparently.
Okay.
We actually
Okay.
don't know this, but we like this idea. The point is, we like this idea that when we think about plays or play initiations or whatever you want to call it, that seems to make sense that someone actively hits play, great,
Mhm.
and then listens or watches for a bit, like 30 seconds, 60. That seems like reasonable. So it's not like someone hit play by mistake or it autoplayed or something. That seems to be reasonable for us. So we like to really pay attention to how many play initiations do we have. So how many
Mhm.
times did someone play and then stuck around for a bit. But also very important, we also like to look at verified listeners, which is kind of like uniques. Well, how many people? How many
Mhm.
people like actually as deduplicated, so we're not double counting people or triple counting people. Those are numbers we pay really, really close attention to. And
Mhm.
again, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, they will give you all that data.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So, how can, I guess, the average buyer of podcast ads or seller of podcast ads, how can they use that information to create stronger campaigns?
Love that question. Love that question. Heather, the truth is, yeah, when we started thinking about all of this and we built this technology that aggregates and normalizes and all that kind of stuff, when we first did this, we were really thinking about growth. We were
Mhm.
really thinking about, okay, how can we use this data to make better growth decisions, better marketing decisions, maybe better editorial decisions, like make better episodes so people stick around. But more recently, I want to say about 9 months ago, we really started thinking about, okay, this data is great for growth decisions and for editorial decisions, but how can we use this data to grow our industry overall? Like,
Mhm.
how can we bring everything up with better data? And we started talking to a bunch of people, a lot of people, in fact, including you, right? We met, you were pointing this out, and might have been in March, right? In Chicago,
Mhm.
maybe,
Yeah.
which was very much sort of starting to think about how can this data actually really help like the business side of the industry, is
Mhm.
mainly advertising, buying or selling. And we're talking to a lot of people. And then in October, we saw the report that Oxford Road put out around how we might be able to add collectively $1 billion into the industry. And part of that was using better data. And they had done a bunch of research, and they were, Oxford Road talked about, maybe some brands having frustrations about the data that we're seeing. And it was super interesting for us because we have just been talking to a bunch of brands and buyers, agencies, about like better data. And then this report came out. And what we've learned is that there's some pretty basic data that advertisers right now are not getting. We don't give it to them. I'll give you one example. This is not the only one. I'll give you one example. The question of how many people have heard my ad? I'm a brand. I'm spending money. How many people have heard my ad? That's actually a question right now that is incredibly difficult to answer.
It
Because
is.
there's a bunch of downloads and how many people actually made it to the ad, there's all these kind of things. But as an advertiser, it seems reasonable to ask that question. Also, there's a bunch of other places that will give you that data. You go to Meta, you go to Google, you go to like all the CTV providers, and you'll get some sort of, is it always perfect? Of course not. But even linear, traditional FM and AM radio will give you a number that tells you how many people you reached. Those are estimates, but at least there's someone decided like, well, this is how we're going to count it. We don't do that right now in podcasting. And our theory is, in fact, our firm belief is that part of the reason why we're not seeing more investment right now is advertisers saying like, well, podcasting is great and it's awesome. And all the studies prove that it's a strong medium and there's a lot of trust, all that stuff that we put out all the time. But there's some basic data points that as an advertiser, I'm not getting. How many people heard the ad or saw the ad? We firmly believe that we need to solve that. We need to change that. We need to just give people better data. And to ask about the opportunity, we think that's the opportunity. Give advertisers better data, more reliable data, or data that they're already used to, frankly, to build trust, but also for people to keep coming back and say like, well, this is great. I'm spending X amount of dollars on podcasting. And we know from advertisers, they want to keep investing, but we've heard this over and over again now. Sometimes it's like, I can't justify this internally because I'm not getting the type of data that I need. We believe that's the opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that is really interesting. And it is very difficult, right? Because we don't have that information. It's not even always easy to assess how many unique listeners there are. So like at True Native Media, we are not going into all of our shows, as you said, like we're not going into their Apple accounts and their Spotify accounts and their YouTube accounts and trying to aggregate all of that, in part because, as you mentioned, the information, it doesn't flow together nicely. It's not exactly the same, right? We're putting apples and grapes and nuts together or whatever, right? Like they're not all the same thing. So they don't flow together nicely. And then frankly, we work with some great hosting providers, but not all of our hosting providers even tell us how many unique listeners there are, period. Right. And like, our current host whom we love, but like, if we want to find out how many unique listeners there are on a show, we have to request a special report. I can't even go into the platform and say, how many unique listeners are there? And I think one of the things too that is really important is that this information changes all the time, right? It's not like you can say, oh, well, a show is stagnant. Hopefully their unique listener count is increasing. Hopefully all of these metrics are increasing, but they may be decreasing, right? And so we don't necessarily have easy access to that information. On the flip side, and one of the questions I had for you is like at True Native, we sell dynamically inserted ads across a full catalog of, episodes. And we really don't talk about downloads very often, but we do talk about impressions, right? Because the idea is that you've got, like, let's say a show, I always like to use 100,000 because it's a nice round number, right? Like you've got a show that is, let's say they're getting 100 downloads a month. We know that we can't deliver 100,000 impressions. And the information that we're always provided is that the hosting provider has some idea where in the podcast someone stops listening. And so if essentially the part of that audio file that gets delivered to you doesn't include the ad, then you're not going to be counted as an impression. So there is some level of information, right? So we know that if it's a 30-minute episode and your ad's at minute 20 and someone stops listening at minute 10, then you're not getting counted as an impression, which is nice, but it's not exact information for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so it is interesting because none of that information is very transparent across the
Agreed.
industry. What are your thoughts about impressions and how we're looking at impressions?
Um, these kind of conversations are always so interesting, and the lack of transparency is so obvious. The example you just described, someone starts listening to an episode,
Hmm.
but doesn't make it to the 20-minute mark where the ad marker is. So that impression is not going to get counted.
Right.
Well, that depends. It might well get counted.
And it depends a
But
lot
if
on the hosting platform
exact,
too.
and it depends on also where people are listening, because an Apple
Hmm.
Podcast is an auto download. The whole episode gets downloaded with all the ads, whether someone listens or not, and it counts as an
True.
impression.
True. So
So
so it depends on where they listen.
100%. It's so
Yes.
messy. So the impression. Um, Impressions are interesting because there is actually no definition for an impression in
Right.
podcasting. That's not a thing. There's this sort of idea of ad delivered. And if we look that up, we can see that. And I'm simplifying here right now, and someone will be able to pull this apart. But basically, it means an ad delivered means an ad is inserted into an MP3 file that was downloaded.
Hmm. Okay. Which,
Was it listened to? Was it not?
right.
Maybe,
Right.
maybe not.
Right.
Um, I'm going to go ahead and say long term, this is not good enough.
Hmm.
And I'm saying that only because, as an advertiser, I'm just thinking, from that point of view, when I buy in somewhere else, and I'm thinking about like I buy in Meta or I'm buying TikTok or something, and I know it's imperfect, but if there's an impression, and we call it an impression, like most people would assume, like someone saw it or heard the ad, at least a little bit, might have skipped it, might have gone past, but at least there's a sort of a reasonable assumption
Hmm.
that impression means that there's a person there. That is actually not the case right now in our industry, not necessarily, and it's just not good enough. That
Hmm.
that is, and again to my earlier point, we've heard enough anecdotes. I don't have
Hmm.
good data, but I've got enough anecdotes where people say, well, I'm not going to reinvest in podcasting as a brand because I'm just not getting the data, or the data I'm getting is an impression. It's like, wait, that doesn't even represent people or it doesn't represent consumption. I can't keep doing this. We need to move past that. And this is a collective issue.
Hmm.
So, and I'm not suggesting we have all the answers or we have the
Sure.
solution, but collectively, if we want to grow this industry, we need to get that fixed.
Yeah. Well, and I grew up selling radio advertising and selling newspaper advertising. People still buy lots of television
Hmm.
advertising, right?
Hmm.
There is a lot of advertising that is done out there that is not measured. And I do think that it is always important for us to say, there are two different ways to look at advertising. So, the first way to look at advertising is, what is the expectation the advertiser has? And is that expectation being met? Right. So, there are lots of different goals that brands might have, right? That you might just be looking for brand awareness. You might like the idea that you're partnering with a host that is creating a really strong ad read for your company that maybe you can repurpose or you can share on social media, you can, leverage. Obviously, we've got a ton of direct response advertisers in the space that say, did this dollar create a return for my company? And so I do think it's important for us to always make sure that we're mentioning that you don't have to have data. You don't have to do anything but look at the results. And
Yeah.
as an advertiser, if the campaign that you have created is delivering the results that you want, that's fabulous because it's delivering the results that you want. And we've obviously got, multi-billion dollar industry that has been created off of that, which is terrific. What I hear you saying that I do think we should look at as an industry is, how many dollars are we missing out on because we are not able to provide this data to, frankly, larger companies, right? And as a marketing executive, as an advertising executive, my job is on the line, right? Like if I place maybe, 100, 200, 300,000 multi-million dollar campaign and it isn't providing the return, and I can't even go to my superior and say, well, this is what we got and this is what we did, my job could be on the line. And so, why would a marketer risk doing something that they're really sticking their neck out for, right? Where they could turn to something like, Meta or like digital advertising and have that track record. So, anyways, I do think that there are those two camps that we do have to be kind of aware of. But if we want to increase revenue, it sounds like you really feel like that data piece is the answer.
I love that point. I fully agree, 100% agree. If you are a direct response advertiser and you really are able to and willing to measure, well, based on this campaign, how did it convert in terms of like sales? I want to
Mm-hmm.
sell a mattress and there's a link, there's a coupon code, we can of course use attribution and I know exactly I spent $100,000 and I sold X amount of $100,000 worth of mattresses. This conversation for them is actually not that important. Do they need to know how many impressions were actually delivered? I mean, I think so. It would be good, but at the end of the day, it's not really going to change what they're doing because they're looking at how many dollars am I spending and how many dollars am I making. This is great. And of course, there's a reason why we're doing so well in terms of direct response advertisers and podcasting. What we're really, and this is what you're talking about, the growth. I think we're missing the big brand advertisers.
Right.
Last time I made a decision whether today I'm going to go to Walmart or Costco, and I had a choice between those two stores. I didn't have use a coupon code. I didn't go to the website, right? They can't, there's no attribution for them. For them, this
Right.
is, of course, those would be brand advertisers. We believe those folks really want to measure at least exposure, just consumption, how many
100%.
people heard the ad, and they
Mm-hmm.
might be shying away from it right now because yes, they can't necessarily measure, well, how many people heard the podcast and then as a result walked into Costco. Costco doesn't do advertising, right? This is a terrible example, but you get the idea. Or
Yeah.
they don't do this kind of advertising. They won't be able to necessarily prove, oh, this is how many people then walked into the store because of the ad, but they might want to know just how much exposure did my ad get? I think those are the dollars that we're missing right now. When
Right.
I'm making a beer decision, when I'm making certain decisions, I'm not going to a website. This is not a direct response thing. I think there's a huge opportunity there and better data can really unlock that for us.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And I think that it is important, which is why I wanted to make the distinction that there is obviously a whole lot of brands who are comfortable with the data that we're giving them.
Yes.
But how many billions of ad dollars are we missing out on because we can't provide the real data that people need? So I guess getting back to the solution here,
Hmm.
obviously Bumper is working on a solution. And I know you said like you're not necessarily claiming that you are the answer to all of these problems, but what is the solution? I feel like for me that's one of the big frustration points I have. I talk a lot on the show about frequency capping,
Hmm.
where we have, so many agencies now who are saying, hey, we want a frequency cap, meaning, we want to make sure the same person isn't hearing our ad 15 times in 1 month, right? That's too often. It's going to burn them out. It's not going to convert them.
Hmm.
But the technology to frequency cap is really janky, frankly. Like
Hmm.
it doesn't really work that well. So I feel like in some ways we can say like this is what we need, but this is what we have, and
Yeah.
and how do we get from where we are to where we need to be?
If you had asked me this, so I think your question is, what should we do, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I think if you had asked me a year ago, and then maybe this is even the conversation that we had in Chicago today, that we would have said like, oh, we need to blow it all up. The way we do this right now, which is essentially, and I'm simplifying here, but we're selling impressions based on downloads. We need to blow it. It's not working. I don't think that anymore. I think we build systems that are imperfect, but they work and people make a living. And of course, many, many brands are extremely happy with it. And we have a thriving industry and it's growing. And so we don't need to blow anything up. We think
Good. I don't think so
that,
either. Let's not
no,
blow anything up.
no, 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 no. Um, Instead, I think we should work on just the reporting end of things.
Yeah.
So our overall idea is that let's trade the way we've been trading. And that's, of course, continues to change. And there's YouTube, and soon there's going to be Apple Video, and there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff that the way we're transacting podcast ads will continue to change, but let's not blow it up. Let's do it the way we do it right now. But post-campaign, there's so much we can do to deliver to advertisers what actually happened. And it's kind of like the way we're now thinking about it is it's kind of more like figuring out the conversion data, which of course you're going to do after the fact. You don't know beforehand what kind of conversion you're going to see. Can we do, and we'd like to use the term, and we're willing to change this term, verified impressions. Can we, or how can we deliver to the advertiser? Here's the campaign. This is how many impressions were delivered based on the way we do it right now. And also, by the way, here's the report. This is how many people actually made it to the ad. This is how many times the ad was actually consumed. Here's how many people skipped the ad. And spoiler, skipping is not really a problem in our industry. We did the math. Skipping, no one skips. It's very, very rare that people skip. It's a tiny problem. Like we think we have an ad skipping problem, we don't. And we see this now over. Okay, we can go back to that. I see your face right now.
Yeah, I do want to talk more about that.
Okay, let's go back to skipping. So can we report, and we can report back to the advertisers, here's your campaign, here's what happened, here's what was delivered. And we need to do that in a scalable way. And we've heard that from very, very large advertisers to say like, yeah, all this is great, but you can't send me spreadsheets. It needs to work into my current systems, APIs, et cetera, et cetera. What I'm describing is 100% possible. And spoiler, of course, we're building this right now. We're actually quite close to being able to do this. And again, we have a great solution. Other people could build the same thing. It's not something proprietary. And basically the idea is that we get consumption data from Apple, from Spotify, from YouTube. We can report back to advertisers what actually happened with those ads and how many people heard them. That's completely possible. We work on this right now. And we think that should be the next big stepping stone. It's better reporting.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. No, I totally agree with you. And so essentially what you're able to do is just take those three platforms, which you said isn't where 100% of the listenership comes, but the vast majority. And then I presume, would just take, this is the audio file, this is where the ads are, this is where, skips happen. This is obviously listen through rate. This is where the skips happened. I mean, and I know you guys developed this for content creation, but I do think that it's so valuable for a content creator too, because you don't know, like you can look, and it's fascinating to me as a content creator, but also as someone who works with lots of content creators. When I look at, for instance, we work with one of the larger personal finance podcasts, and some of his episodes just get tons and tons of consumption, and some of them don't hardly get any consumption. And I think, what was it about this one episode that people didn't like? Why did more people not listen to this? And as a content creator, how valuable to be able to go through and say, man, around this point. And also, I think it's really fascinating the length of podcast episodes. Like, how long is the right length? Should it be 15 minutes? Should it be 30, 60, 2 hours. Really interesting. I was just listening to the Magellan Q4 benchmark report, and podcasts that are 15 minutes or lower have huge ad loads, right? But once you get over like the 30-minute mark, the ad load's really not bad. And so like, I feel like all of that information, it's so valuable for the content creator. But obviously it's super valuable for the advertiser too, to know. And so it sounds like you're able to just match those pieces up to be able to see where the consumption is actually happening.
In simple terms, exactly right. It's matching all those pieces and reporting back. The problem is to do it at scale. Because we could all do it on a spreadsheet and for one episode, no problem at all. But then when you get to dynamically inserted ads, wait, how do we do this if not the same ads running? But it is all possible. It is all possible, and we're working on that, yes. We're already doing this. Frankly, we are already doing this right now because we are actually ad buyers ourselves.
Yes,
we buy ads. We buy ads on other shows.
Media.
That's right. So as much as feasible right now, we are already doing this, the verification that I'm talking about. So we're buying ads the usual way, and we're buying based on CPMs and all that kind of stuff. But then afterwards, we verify how many people have actually heard the ad. We are already starting to do this, sort of in a sort of test capacity right now. It is hugely, as an advertiser, which is a very small part of our business, but we do that as an advertiser, extremely interesting and helpful, especially for the next campaign. Because it's, I mean, again, I talked about this earlier, like learning from the data. It's very simple. Like, I mean, the campaign that performed better, not in terms of conversion, but just pure exposure, we're obviously going to buy on that one next time. And if we realize, oh, we bought the campaign and actually no one heard the ad, well, maybe next time we're not going to reinvest.
Right. Well, and I think that one of the pieces in the podcast industry that I do get a little frustrated by is that I understand the micro creators, the mid level creators, and my heart is with them, right? Like, I get
Hmm.
that they're putting so much time and effort. But if we're looking at it from purely a business perspective, if your show doesn't have a critical mass, then you're not going to convert for advertisers, right? Like, yes, if I wanted to get up on stage and talk to 100 people, that would be amazing. And I would get to talk to 100 people. How many of those 100 people are going to go buy a $2,000 mattress tomorrow?
Hmm.
Not very many, right? And so you do, if we're talking about creating real advertising results, you really need to reach a lot of people. And I think that that's the piece sometimes that we miss is that a show that doesn't reach a lot of people is still an amazing show, but it might not create real advertising results. And I think that that's an important assumption to kind of make. And I don't know that it's always made.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, maybe it's unfortunate, but just the way we buy these days, some scale needs to be required. Otherwise, it's
It
just
does.
not worth it. It's
It's not
just
fair.
unfortunately like because you have to talk to someone, we negotiate, we talk to when we buy ads, we talk to every podcaster. We don't really do run a network buys.
Uh-huh.
We handpick shows that we want to buy on because we feel there's a good audience fit. We reach out to them individually or, of course, to their representatives. Um, it doesn't scale well. I can't have that conversation 500 times. Like
Right.
unfortunately, I would love to be able to, but I can't have that. I would love to buy on shows that get 200 downloads a month. But unfortunately, it's just not possible right now.
Right, right. So let's talk a little bit about the skipping. So I think
Mm.
one of the pieces that I just absolutely love so much about podcasts is how engaged the audience is,
Hmm.
how
Hmm.
dedicated the listener is. And so, yeah, tell us a little bit about what your findings are around that.
So broadly, everything you describe about a dedicated audience, it is all the data proves that, and we're not
Mhm,
the only ones who have figured this out. That when people start a podcast episode, they're probably going to make it all the way through. Like, if we think about for those that are listening that have access to this data, often what we see for podcast episodes, especially when they're like between, I don't know, 20 and 60 minutes or something,
mhm,
average listen through rate, we call it average listen time, often 60, 70, 80, maybe 90%. That's an
mhm,
average. So if someone makes it an average through 80%, that means many people made it all the way through. Some didn't, but many people made it all the way through.
mhm.
Um, it is incredible. Where else do you get that?
Right.
Wait, if I'm publishing a white paper or like some long blog post, like a long blog post that would take someone half an hour to read, how many people
Nowhere.
make it to the end? Maybe zero? Probably
Right.
zero, right? It's all those books that are everywhere behind you and behind me here. Like, I mean, how many of those have we read all the way through? I don't know. I don't want to say, but it's unbelievable what we do in podcasting. This is such a wonderful thing and so powerful. And I realize I don't have to pitch you on the idea of podcasting. You do this, of course. Now, what we see in terms of ad skipping is something really interesting. And my colleague Dan Meiser just published a blog post a few days ago about this. We looked at thousands of ad breaks and we tried to kind of figure out, well, first of all, what is ad skipping? Is that mean someone didn't make it to the ad or someone didn't listen to the ad where they should have listened to? But often what it looks like when you look at these sort of retention curves, like we call it an ice cream scoop. We've seen this before where everyone is there. 100% of your listeners are probably there at the first, second mark. Most people start at the start.
Mhm.
You don't actually have to, but the vast majority of listeners list start at the start of the
I've
episode.
never started in the middle of a podcast. That's so interesting. I've
No,
always
you can
started
do
at the
that.
beginning.
In
It's never
right,
occurred to me.
but in YouTube is it much more common because of
Oh,
like
sure.
jumping
Yeah,
in
yeah.
like into
And
a
you can
chapter.
see, like, and I think too, like when I go to YouTube, I'm like, a lot of times I'm there for specific reasons. So I'm like, I want to
Mhm.
get to the part of the video where
That's
my
it.
question's answered. Or,
Yeah,
yeah. Hmm.
that's exactly right. But in podcast, on the audio side or audio first, we don't really see that. Everyone's at the
Hmm.
start, and then we start losing people. We call those retention curves.
Sure.
And then you have in this retention curve these little dips where it's clear that people weren't around for a few, often 30 seconds or 60 seconds, and then they come back. And then for us, that means like, well, there's probably an ad there. It doesn't have to be. Maybe it's something else that was really boring. But most of the time, when there's a dip, basically every time there's some sort of ad. So we ran this across thousands of ad breaks, and we tried to figure out like how much do people really skip? And it is not a perfect average, but very often it is only 10%. So this is not like the overall average, but 10% is a very, very common number. Okay. 10% of the listeners, when they make it to an ad break, skip. Actually, let's turn this around. I don't care about 10%. 90% didn't skip. This is what we call ad retention. 90% of the audience, again, where else do you see this? With ad blockers and like especially on YouTube where everyone skips all the ads all the time. And this is not a perfect comparison, but we have a medium where people don't skip the ads. Frankly, this is why we wrote the blog post. We need to tell people about this. We need to tell advertisers like how rare it is that people skip ads. And I think it's just convenience. It's just like the phone is in my pocket. I'm driving. I can't really like skip. That's one thing. But there's also just the fact that, yeah, if the host tells me about a product and I know the host and I trust the host, fine. Tell me about this new thing that I should be trying out. Like I trust the voice. I know the voice. Maybe even it's delivered in a way that's funny or engaging or impactful. The data suggests that we're doing such an amazing job delivering our ads. We need to share this more.
That's so great to hear. I definitely have to get that blog post and share it on our end because I've always been so curious, and I don't think there's been a lot of studies that have done, in part, as we've been talking about, because the consumption data isn't necessarily readily available. There isn't a lot of information out there about that. So that's really very fascinating.
Information that is out there, and we found that, of course, Sounds Profitable did a thing. This was it's all in the blog post, and I'm forgetting, I think it was 2 years ago. Is that they ask people, hey, do you skip ads? How many people skip ads? And if you ask people, they all say like, yeah, I skip ads all the time. Because it's survey based, right? And you think like because you skipped an ad, you think you do it all the time.
Right.
Exactly. That's the survey data. But the power, because of the data that we have access to, is actual consumption data. Like for real, what did people do as opposed to when we asked them? It was just so encouraging to see, frankly. It was such a good news story for us to say like, oh yeah, people might say they skip ads, but you know what? They don't really. They don't.
Right,
And that's
right.
wonderful.
Well, and I think that, for me, this goes back to the power of audio, which is I know that there are people that sit and listen to audio and don't do anything else. But I do think the vast majority of people, when you're listening to something, you're doing something else,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so it is harder, like if I'm washing the dishes or if I'm exercising or even if I'm driving, like it is harder to stop what you're doing and fast forward through the ads. And, like you said, when it's the host that's reading, it's like, it's not that bad anyways, right? Like
Yes.
I'm interested in what they say. So, and one of the things I always tell people that I would not have thought is a real thing, that is a totally real thing, is that podcasters turn down brands all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It is
Mm-hmm.
amazing to me. When I started in this industry, I
Mm-hmm.
thought, if I come to you and I say, Jonas, someone wants to spend $5,000 with you, I'm thinking you're going to say, that sounds great. It's shocking to me the number of times hosts say, no, I don't like that brand. I don't want to advertise them. And I think, wait, my job is to bring you money and I just brought you money and you're turning it down. So, I mean, I think all of that together really helps the effectiveness of podcast ads for sure.
An interesting thing about the responsibility that hosts or producers or people that have podcasts have. So, to your example about I'm doing the dishes, and there's no judgment here, but if I know my audience is doing something else, yeah, let's really think about the ad load.
Mhm.
Because I kind of trust you, host, that, my phone is in my pocket now. I'm not going to touch that thing. You've got me for the next hour, but don't take advantage of me, right? Let's
Mhm.
make sure like the ad load is reasonable and the ad creative, it sort of
It's
meets a certain
entertaining.
expectation, is entertaining,
Mhm.
seems all pretty standard stuff. And I think good or podcasters that respect their audience totally get it. And that, to your point, that's when I turn down brands, when it's just like, this is not going to fly with my audience. And I think that's wonderful. Also, like for the future of humanity, people turning down money. I think this is really, really great news. By the way, we see this all the time where we want to spend money and people don't want to take the money because they
Uh-huh.
just are not, it's just not working for them. I think it's so wonderful. Um, you know, everything we described, I think this is a conversation that you and I maybe had before, you had it with other people, right? The power of our medium, if I may bring it back to the data, we just need to be able to show advertisers, like not just the sort of warm fuzzies that we're sharing here right now, but can we put that better down on like, how many people feel like that? And we're so close. We've got
Mhm.
so many good news story in our medium. It's trusted, people stick around, people don't skip ads. We just need a little bit more. And if we can tell these stories to advertisers, that next $1 billion, next $2 billion, I think it's there. I think I want to tell you one story about this was a very, very large media buying agency, not independent. So sort of holdco company. They were telling the story that is the amount of times they have a brand coming to them. Okay, so this is a media buying agency, and a brand would come to them. So this would be like a major brand, come to them and say like, "I love podcasting," and often it's the individual, it's the person who says like, "Love podcasts. I listen to Call It Eddie all the time. I want to spend some money here." Coming in with a passion for, first of all, what an amazing thing that people just like the medium, want to bring money to us, wonderful, and then they do a campaign and then do the thing, and afterwards they say, "I love this medium, but I can't reinvest. I don't have the data to support. I can't go to my bosses and show them this." We're so close. Like this person loves podcasting already and they're already in. We don't have to convince them. They already want to do this. We just need to like level up certain things a little bit more. And I believe personally, they're getting the renewal from that person who already loves the medium. We're so close to being able to do this. And we don't have to blow anything up. We think there's probably other things that are missing here. We think data is a big piece. Of course, it's our business. We're so close. I think over the next year, we can all together collectively create such a big change and really enable that next, or at least the start of the next $1 billion. I feel super optimistic and super positive.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to piggyback on what you said, I think that it's very fascinating to me how many people love podcasts. It's equally fascinating to me how many people don't like podcasts at all. I feel like it's a very kind of black and white type platform. Either you love it or it's just not for you. And I've heard that so many times throughout the years. Like, I've tried podcasts, they're just not for me. So to your point, when you've got that buyer that is all in on podcasting, they have to be able to share the story of consumption with their team. And right now, that passion isn't always enough to convince the team that this thing that they really don't have a lot of experience or really a lot of even like for is going to be a good fit for them. And I've seen it flipped too, a lot of times where a buyer will come to us and they'll say, "My boss said that I needed to buy podcast ads." And I'll say, "Are you a podcast listener?" And they'll say, "No, I'm not, it's not for me." And you can tell that they just don't get it. And we don't have, like, there is all that soft, warm, fuzzy, like all of that is so great, but we don't have a lot of the concrete pieces that could really help with conversions.
I wonder what's better. Because I totally agree with you. Some people just don't like podcasting, like whatever. They just don't like, some people don't like music, which is crazy, but some people just don't, or don't read books or whatever. No judgment there, right? Would we rather be a medium that, whatever the numbers, 50% of North America loves, and the other one is sort of feels not so strongly about? Or would we rather be medium that everyone kind of thinks is okay? I think I take what we have right now. I think I take the passionate smaller.
I like the passion. No, absolutely.
I like the passion. For sure.
Yeah.
I can't think of another medium, but everyone feels kind of like, maybe like certain type, oh God, I don't want to name them right now, but maybe certain type of social media networks right now where lots of people are like,
Yeah.
Oh, it's interesting. I love that.
No,
that's a great thought.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. Well, Jonas, thank you so much for being on the show today. If people want to connect with you, read your blog post, learn more about what you guys are doing, where's a good place for them to find you?
Maybe our website, which is wearebumper.com. People can sign up. We have this dashboard that I described. This is this aggregation tool. People can sign up. There's free trials. Lots of announcements coming over the next few months. So there's some pretty exciting stuff that we're working on that we will launch within weeks, maybe more weeks as opposed to months. So yeah, it's going to be exciting.
Excellent. Well, thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you for listening to the episode. I hope that you have enjoyed it. As we have discussed today, we are a really amazing, valuable medium, but there is a lot still to be desired. So stay tuned because things are definitely changing in the industry, and we are going to be bringing you all of those updates on the show. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you again next time. Thank you for listening to the Podcast Advertising Playbook.